my name is Sandra Vickery. I'm going to talk about some examples in use and how we're applying design thinking in the digital customer experience environment. So my talk is a little bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'm going to kind of start off by some of the day-to-day problems that we come across. I think a lot of people resonate with them. I'm calling that jumping to conclusions. The second is a transformation example, definitely on the more complex side. You know, I can see why it's good to get consultancies involved because there's always a lot of complexity. And then I'll just go through some key takeaways. So my journey so far, I come from a design background and digital marketing. I've worked at a lot of companies. I definitely resonate with some of the healthcare issues. I worked in healthcare for many years. Also worked in financial technology, so it was very regulated. As well as kind of small design houses and different kinds of consultancies. I then went into the startup world, which is where I learned that I knew nothing about a lot of things. I definitely did the kind of fail fast. You know, I learned more about design thinking there than I have ever realized, you know, the importance of it for business and design. Definitely changed the way I saw things. And then I came back out of that and took those learnings back into businesses that I worked for. I currently mentor UX UI on an online platform. And I'm also the senior manager of UX UI at BT Enterprise on the digital customer experience side. So some familiar problems to people, I think. Retrofitting design into completed development, completed designs never seeing the light of day, designs developed and pushed live, but customers don't really care. I think these are unfortunately more common than we would all like. So meet Steve. He's one of my mentees. We had a call a few weeks ago and I just thought it was such a good example because these kinds of conversations happen more frequently than we would like to realize. So he's a healthcare coach. He's contracted to a large shipping company in the US. And he's been asked to work with an ergonomics team to look at improving the content on their website. And that content supports employees whose jobs can be physically demanding and they sometimes result in injury. So Steve suggests turning articles online into videos, and the stakeholder that he's discussing this with thinks this is a great idea, good approach. So on our mentee call, Steve asks me, what's the best way to select the correct content in order to create videos from? Which I thought, okay, this is an interesting question. To which I replied back to him, is this the right thing to be looking into? I mean, what evidence do you actually have to support this? So, you know, what's the actual problem that Steve is solving for? I don't think it was clear to him. So, you know, back to the question of the 5 whys, you know, this is just a really simple technique that you can use to not just for customers, which it is very good for, but also for colleagues. And by that I mean when you've got internal stakeholders coming to you with something that you're trying to solve or they want to be solved, instead of having the solution kind of jumping to that straight away, have this discussion with them and you'll get to a depth of conversation. So what that looks like in terms of solving kind of root cause analysis, in terms of conversation is, you know, why are staff getting injured? They're not following best practice. Why are they not following best practice? Because they're not aware of the guidelines or they don't recall. Now, at this stage, in the conversation that I had with my mentee, we didn't have more knowledge than that. And that's because he hadn't gone away and talked to users. And that's why the user centricity is so important. Because if you don't actually know these things, then you can't actually solve for it in the best possible way. So if I was continuing on with those questions, my next one would be, why are they not aware of the guidelines? Because they don't attend workshops or read online material. Why are they not attending or reading? Because they feel they don't have the time. Why do they not feel like they have the time? Because they're only paid for the work logged. And so this output would change everything, because it's gone from being something that you do in a digital environment to something that's maybe solved in an HR policy environment, or maybe changing behavior or some kind of internal culture. And in this kind of technique, it's really good for briefs or problems that aren't very well defined. And very quickly you can have that discussion with a stakeholder to realize that then they need to go away and either do a little bit more research, or you need to set up a session with customers to discuss things more with them. So originally the problem statement, or the how might we, might have been, how might we reduce the number of injuries on the job? And that's actually quite a broad question. So I would turn that now into, based on that, using that 5 whys technique, into how might we integrate training into the employee's day? And then off the back of that, you've got questions such as, how frequently does this need to be done? What kind of training is needed? What format could this take? Are there differing needs? And you can use those questions when you go and observe users or interview users. So at BT, in the kind of digital customer experience environment, or even broader than that, customer experience and technology, we have dedicated teams in different areas that we use to support different points of the process. So sometimes we tap into each other's resources depending on what the needs are. Our aim in the future is to embed this throughout the team so that it's not just a specialist sitting within our team from a design perspective, but also strategists, people in operations, product owners, digital product owners are all using these techniques. And it's just a norm. It's just part of our culture and our DNA. That would be the ideal. And that's, I think, what we're heading towards. In terms of transformation, we go through a process that's probably a little bit more like how Naveed was showing, but I'm going to simplify it for the presentation. So in terms of our preparation going into, say, a workshop environment, we would try and gather all the artifacts together that had been produced previously, because there's often work that's already been done. That might be research, that might be blueprints or process maps, whatever those are, we collate it all. The first week might look like an agreement of what that current experience is, because that by itself can be hard. And if you're trying to build on it, you need to know what the current experience looks like. On top of that, we start adding the opportunities and we start looking at the pain points. But then we also look at what the future ideal is without getting hung up on the current experience. And that way we're not too restricted. The second week, we would try and look at tech feasibility. And these go over several days, not for the whole week, but at least kind of 2 or 3 days. Similar to the double diamond approach, you know, we've got this kind of process where it's all about learning up front. You're learning through user observation and research. You're then going into a discovery mode. It's really important to get to the root cause of problems, because that can change everything that you do in terms of the solution process. And then, of course, you're trying to generate lots of different ideas. So you're not focused just on one being the thing to be done. And again, back to Naveed's kind of presentation around making sure you're validating that. Definitely, you know, it's so easy to go out and just build something and then release it. It's not so easy to make sure you're doing it in the right way with the right customer feedback. So you must do this kind of validation up front, and it can be super simple. And there's so many techniques, and I think one of the discussions will be around that later on. Some of the things we do, again, mentioned previously, empathy maps, really great way of understanding your customers' emotions, and that they can really unlock a lot of things that you hadn't thought about. We do some defining of problems. It breaks it down a little bit more. I'm a big fan of the customer fit canvas, the value proposition framework. I think it really connects kind of customers and needs. And we also do some ideation around what the idea is, but also then turning that into a 30-second pitch to keep it nice and succinct and make sure that people are understanding and communicating. These are all workshop activities that we do over several days. It looks like something like this, lots of sticky notes. You know, again, we want to get out of the computer, we want to kind of break out of that, and that inspires and gets people thinking more creatively. We have printouts of these methodologies so that we can just apply them. Sometimes if we've got a lot of information already, we will pre-populate those. You know, touching on back to the kind of theoretical background of it all, But why it's important is you can have each of these areas, feasibility, viability, and desirability, individually exist, but it doesn't make for a very good outcome. You can have something that customers want, but you can't build. You can have something that, you know, is cheap, but nobody wants, etc. So it's really about getting the sweet spot in the middle of these things working together, and thinking divergently, thinking holistically, and thinking in an integrated manner it really does work on a business sense, because once you get this, you generally get a good return. So it's good value. And how do you do that? You're feeding in your assumptions and you're prototyping. We, after the workshops, just to take it back to kind of technically what we do, we take them and we put them into these mapping techniques, and then we translate that into something a little bit more visual so that stakeholders can all be on the same page and we communicate that well. And ultimately, it's just making sure that we're designing the right thing and we design the thing right. That's what it comes down to. That's all about it being cost effective, but it being what users always want. Kind of in summary, key takeaways, I'd say, you know, it really, really helps for you to get clarity on ill-defined problem when you're using design thinking. It drills it down. You can use it on really small problems, such as Steve's example, but also large complex problems, transformation kind of changes. It communicates across teams, which makes a huge difference to the change of culture. And it cuts through any mental tech restrictions. So you're not thinking and getting hung up on things, but of course you need to know about regulations, but that weaves into it. It's also, it allows you to be faster, even though you might be failing and doing things the wrong way. It reduces your risk in the long term, so it's better for those incremental losses. I would say things to keep in mind is ensure that you're doing the right activities, because there's a lot of things to choose from, and also ensure that you've got representation across the organisation. And thank you very much. Whistle stop tour.